What's going on, everybody? Hockey Time here, back for another tier list video. We have done the goaltenders and done the defensemen, so it's time to take care of the forwards. Again, I'm going to run through all 32 teams, the same tiers as we had for the defense tier list. And again, I am just going into this raw, looking at the lines that are currently listed in Daily Faceoff. There's obviously going to be some changes through preseason and obviously just some incorrectness here on Daily Faceoff based on injury, based on who they have paired with whom, but by and large, just grading these as groups, not so much worried about individual lines like I was for the D pairs. So that all being said, let's jump right into it with the Anaheim Ducks. This is kind of an interesting group right off the jump. They have some decent pieces here and some guys that are projected to probably have some more growth this season, looking at Leo Carlson, Trevor Zegras, hopefully a bounce back, Troy Terry, still a relatively young guy, Mason McTavish, Cutter Gauthier. It's a pretty solid young core here in Anaheim, but I think for now it probably still belongs in the bad tier. And again, as with the other ones, I'll probably do a bit of maneuvering throughout the video. So we'll start with Anaheim in bad. I could see them bumping up to subpar, but for now we'll start them there. The Boston Bruins. This is a group that did improve marginally, in my opinion, in the offseason with the addition of Elias Lindholm. I think that alone offsets the losses that they had up front, which were largely their depth guys. It's not a fantastic forward group here in Boston. The big names, Lindholm, Pastrnak, Marchand, if you still consider him one of those guys. And then really from there, it kind of falls off to more middle six to bottom six guys. Looking at Frederick, Patra, Brazo, Johnny Beecher, a couple guys that are looking to maintain full NHL responsibilities this season. I think for now I'm going to throw them in good. Obviously, having one of, if not the, not the best goal scorer in the NHL, but one of them, and David Pastrnak, is going to make it pretty easy to have at least a top 50% offense group here. But I don't love what the Bruins have. They're obviously not going to have trouble scoring, but just compared to some other groups, the other depth in the league, I don't love it as much as I do some other groups. The Buffalo Sabres, and this is one that I'm probably more high on than I should be. Big names, of course, Thompson, Tuck, Cousins, Jack Quinn, and Zach Benson, both looking to improve their roles, and J.J. Paterka. I also really like some of the moves they made in the offseason. Again, largely depth guys. They did add Jason Zucker. He's likely to fill in that left wing 2 spot, but Ryan McLeod in that trade with Edmonton, Beck Malenstein, Sam Lafferty, Nick Obey-Kubel, all offseason additions that I think are going to help the depth of this team a lot. They're going to provide a little bit more of a physical identity, and I actually think these guys are going to go in the same tier as the Bruins. I think 2 seasons ago, when they were just unbelievable offensively, was probably a bit above what they truly are, and I think last season the regression was just a step below where they should really be at, and I think this year they'll settle into being still a top 50% team offensively, but probably not in the top, 5 to 8 teams, barring another, close to 50-goal season from Tage Thompson, close to 40 for Alex Tuck, etc., etc. The Calgary Flames, this is obviously a group that's been depleted over the last couple of years. Huberdeau still needs to pick up his game to at least get close to the contract value that he's getting paid. And they've seen some pieces depart too. Again, they're top 6 now. Huberdeau, Backlund, Coleman, Zari, Sharangovich, and Mantha, as it's listed on Daily Faceoff. That's not the most impressive thing. They do have Kadri and Kuzmenko on the third line, which is a pretty solid-looking third line if that's the way they deploy it. But there's rumors around Kadri potentially getting moved. I wouldn't be surprised to see some of these other guys getting moved at the deadline. I think they probably go in the subpar tier. I don't think it's a bad group offensively, but they definitely lack some of the firepower that a lot of other teams had. So for now, we're going to keep them in that second to last tier. The Carolina Hurricanes. This is a group that definitely sees a bit of a fall off, especially in the loss of Jake Gensel. They also lose Evgeny Kuznetsov to the KHL, which is not a major loss for them. But this is the first time in a little bit here where we look at the Carolina roster on the offense especially, and you don't really see as much depth as we're used to seeing with this group. The top 6 is still very good. Svechnikov, Aho, Jarvis, Natchez, Kotkaniemi as that second-line center, most likely. And then Bradley Nadeau is listed as the second-line left wing. We'll see whether or not that sticks. He definitely has the potential to be that kind of guy, but obviously this would be his rookie year in the NHL, and that's quite a large expectation for him. I think for now this group just has to go in good as well. I don't think it's quite to that level of being great yet. Svechnikov is really the closest thing they have from pure offensive standpoint to being an elite offensive guy. Of course, Aho may be considered an elite player, but he's more of a two-way guy than he is strictly an offensive guy. And you need a little bit more from someone like Marty Necas, Jesperi Kotkaniemi, maybe even a guy like Jack Roslovic to expect to fill the net a little bit more this year, with the losses of Gensel, Teravainen, and Kuznetsov. So for now, we're going to keep them in good. This team's still going to be a playoff team, most likely, but definitely a bit of a fall off from where they've previously been. The Chicago Blackhawks, they definitely made some moves to improve this offseason. Bertuzzi, Teravainen, Craig Smith gets brought in, a full season of Ilya Mikheyev, hopefully Taylor Hall, Philip Kurashev, and of course Connor Bedard kind of leading the charge here. I honestly don't know whether to put these guys in subpar or fine. I think they're already better than the likes of an Anaheim, most likely. I mean, if Bedard gets injured or if Bertuzzi or Teravainen gets injured, it gets a little bit tough. But I think the upside of this group is probably a bit higher than that of Anaheim, so I'm going to put them in subpar for now. I could be very wrong on this one. This is probably one I'll take a little bit of heat for just because their depth is really not that great. But I think that top line has potential to actually be really, really good if they end up keeping Bertuzzi, Bedard, and Teravainen together. And frankly, I think if Philip Kurashev has a follow-up year as good as the year he had last year and improves a little bit on his game, I don't hate a second line of Hall, Athanasiou, and Kurashev. It's probably closer to a third line at this point in Hall and Athanasiou's careers, but I do think there's some potential there for them to do a bit of scoring. So I don't hate what the Blackhawks have built offensively, built a bit of cushion around Connor Bedard, which is much needed after what he had to work with last season. The Colorado Avalanche, and this is a group that it just seems like every day there's a new issue for. They, of course, will start the season without Gabe Landeskog and Valeri Nichushkin, and now we found out that Arturi Lehkonen is probably going to be out for a bit of time as well. So this group, while it's very, very good up front, continues to just lose depth piece by piece. Of course, that top line's still going to be in place. Drouin, McKinnon, Rantanen is a top 5 line in the league, in my opinion. But now your second line looks something like Miles Wood, Casey Middlestat, and one of Nikolai Kovalenko, who would be a rookie in the NHL this year, or a guy like Logan O'Connor filling in on that second line. And all respect to Logan O'Connor, but he's not meant to be a second line right wing. So all that in mind, I think I have to put them in just the good tier. Again, for now, they might be the first team I bump up to this great tier as I go through this, but at least barring the injuries, like if this team's healthy, they're definitely in the great tier, and they might bump up to the elite tier. So, I'm going to stick them in good, or in great, excuse me. I think at certain points in the year, they're going to have at least one, if not two, of Lehkonen, Landeskog, and Nichushkin back, so I think only fair probably to put them up here. They have a top 3 center in the league in Nathan McKinnon, a top 5 winger in the league in Mikko Rantanen, and a pretty good bout of depth guys in their bottom 6 that don't wow you off the page, but of course do their jobs more than enough, as we saw last year when they also had plenty of injury issues. The Columbus Blue Jackets, I'm not going to harp on this team for too long, obviously, still relatively fresh off the news of the passing of Johnny Gaudreau. This is a bad offense. Their best piece at this point is probably Sean Monahan, which is not saying all that much, so it's going to be probably a tough year offensively for this team. We'll see if some guys like Fantilli, Johnson, Chinnikov continue to have growth years. If they do, it'll be good. I don't know, what the realistic ceiling for this team is this season as far as offense is concerned. I really don't expect it to be all that high, so this team is going to stay in the bottom tier for me. The Dallas Stars, so this one may be a bit controversial because their biggest name is probably Jason Robertson, and he's not a top 10 player in the league. But I think just because of the depth this group has, they have to go in elite. And I'm going to rattle off all the names, unlike what I've done for other teams, just because it is ridiculous the amount of depth this team has. So it's Robertson, Hintz, and Johnston on the first line, Marchment, Duchesne, Sagan on the second, Jamie Benn, Maverick Bourque, and Logan Stankoven on the third, and then Dadonov, Steele, and Colin Blackwell rounding out that bottom line. And this is without Joe Pavelski. Imagine Joe Pavelski didn't retire this year, and they are able to tout a line that has Maverick Bourque on the fourth line. I mean, this team has so much depth offensively, and again, the biggest name they have offensively as far as scoring prowess goes is probably Jason Robertson, so it's not like they have a McDavid, a McKinnon, a Matthews, but I think maybe more than any other team in the league, this team can roll 4 lines against pretty much any team and be perfectly content with it. They're going to be able to keep their guys rested. They're going to be able to keep high pace, high energy, and probably just really control the game in the front half of the neutral zone and into the offensive zone. So I really like what this team's built up front, and I think they're going to be a force to be reckoned with in the West yet again. The Detroit Red Wings, this one's kind of hard to read, to be completely honest. That first line should be pretty good, assuming Lucas Raymond signs. DeBrincat, Larkin, and Raymond. And then they bring in Vladdy Tarasenko, and he'll probably be with JT Compher and Patrick Kane, which I don't hate. But it's an older line. It's probably not meant to be a second line, and it's going to have a tough time, I think, competing with some other second lines in the league. I think this is probably going to be our first offense that goes in the fine tier. I think that top line, when it's firing on all cylinders, can be very good, and it probably pushes being a top 10 line in the league. But below that, it falls off pretty quickly. I mean, their third line, Rasmussen, Kopp, and Berggren, it's okay. Same for their fourth line, Montaleno and Fisher. It's just there's nothing that really jumps off the page about these guys aside from that Larkin, DeBrincat, and Raymond line. And again, we have to assume that Lucas Raymond is getting signed. So for now, we're going to keep them in fine. I think they're just a hair below a team like the Carolina Hurricanes offensively. If they can get another depth piece, that would do a lot, especially if it could be another center. I think that would help them a good bit, but for now we're going to keep them in that fine tier. The Edmonton Oilers, much better than fine, even with the departure of a guy like Dylan Holloway. The moves they made this offseason to put some padding around McDavid and Draisaitl make this probably the scariest upside forward group in the league. Nuge, McDavid, Hyman, Skinner, Draisaitl, and Arvidsson as your top six is ridiculous. On an island, those two names, Skinner and Arvidsson, don't really do all that much to scare you, but you pair it with a guy like Leon Draisaitl, who's both the shooting and playmaking threat to the level that he is, and those guys are both going to see big point increases this year, I think. And of course, when needed, they can throw Draisaitl in a line with McDavid and Hyman, and that we all know the force that is behind that. So the Oilers are going in elite. As long as they have these two guys, it's going to be hard to place them anywhere else. I expect this team to be one of, if not the highest scoring teams in the league this season. The the Florida Panthers, they do lose a few pieces, both off the defense and off the offense, but the big piece that they were concerned about losing in the offseason, biggest piece, I should say, was Sam Reinhart, and he sticks around here, so their top six still looks really good. It's for Hagee, Barkov, Reinhart, Kachuk, Bennett, and Rodriguez, and then they have one of the better third lines in the league, I think, in Losterine and Lundell, and then they have Mackie Samoskevich listed there. It does fall off a bit in their bottom six. It's not nearly as strong as it was in, as early as last year, but I still think this is a really good group, and I think they have one of the more balanced top nines in the league. So for that reason, I am going to put them up in the great tier. Kind of similar to Carolina in the extent that they don't have that one offensive guy that really jumps off the page at you. Sam Reinhart was that guy last year. I would expect him to regress a bit this year. I don't think he's going to have a bad year by any means, but I think expecting something closer to 40 goals is a little bit more reasonable than expecting him to push 50 and almost get 60 like he did last season. And Matthew Tkachuk, probably below his standards a little bit as far as point production went last year. I'd expect him to score just a bit more, and he's probably the biggest name offensively they have as far as peak potential goes. But all in all, this is a great forward group, and I do expect them to be extremely competitive in the East and probably compete for the top of that conference. The Los Angeles Kings, a bit less competitive here than the likes of Florida. But it's still a pretty well-rounded group. I mean, your center depth is still really strong, especially if Quentin Byfield plays center this year. It's Kopitar, Byfield, Deneau, and Alex Turcotte. Their pieces on the wing are not all that strong. Looking at names like Kempe and Fiala are really the big ones. And then Trevor Moore, who seems to always have good years, at least better than expectations would be. But I don't know that this group has quite enough to compete with some of the other top teams in the West here. I think they probably go in fine with Detroit. They might be a fringe good one. I'm not 100% sure. But I just think they don't have as much upside as a team like a Boston, like a Buffalo that has a guy like, Pastrnak or Tage Thompson that could, at any given night pop 2 or 3. The closest thing to that for LA is probably Kevin Fiala, who did not have a great year last year. And the likes of a guy like Anze Kopitar, Philip Deneau are not getting any younger. So I think keeping them in fine, at least for now, is fair. And we'll see how this group ends up producing going into the season. The Minnesota Wild, this is a really fun one. Free agency day, they really didn't do all that much, and it was kind of, for me at least, my mood around the team wasn't that great. But again, I feel like the more I look at this roster, the more I like it, especially their top six. Kirill Kaprizov, Marco Rossi, Matt Zuccarello, Mojo, Joel Eriksson-Ek, and Matt Boldy in their top six. And then their third line, Marcus Foligno, Murat Kustatinov, and Ryan Hartman. That top nine is pretty solid. I think things fall off a bit in the third line there, but Ryan Hartman is a third line guy, is going to be pretty valuable. Same for Marcus Foligno. And then their fourth line, as far as value goes for guys playing that role, it's Lauko, Gaudreau, and Trennan. I like that a good bit. I think this is a good group. I think that top six especially has the ability to do damage, looking for more growth from Matt Boldy, Marco Rossi, and Joel Eriksson-Ek, all still pretty young. Marco Rossi going into, I think this will just be his second full NHL season, and Matt Boldy into his now third or fourth, I believe. So still plenty of upside for this group. I do expect Kirill Kaprizov to still have another 100-ish point season, and he'll be the most important player for this team, barring the likes of Philip Gustafsson or Marc-Andre Fleury having really good or bad years. So I like what this group has. I'll be very interested to see how they end up producing, similar to the likes of a Buffalo Sabres type team. So exciting year ahead for the Minnesota Wild. The Montreal Canadiens. This one got much more interesting with the addition of Patrick Laine. And similar deal with Minnesota. Like, the more I look at this team, the more intrigued I am by it. I'm not buying into the hype that they could potentially be a playoff team, but they're really deeper than I ever kind of gave them credit for. Down the middle, if Kirby Dach can stay healthy, it's not a top 10 center group by any means, but it's definitely better than it was last year when it was just Suzuki and then Christian Dvorak. And then, of course, the other guys on their top six, Slavkovsky, Caulfield, Newhook, if he plays wing, and then Patrick Laine. So there's a lot of upside potential with that top six. I think you could see a huge jump from a guy like Slavkovsky. Cole Caulfield didn't have the best year last year, and obviously there is plenty of upside room for a guy like Patrick Laine. It's one of the bigger swing teams. I think on the upside, they could slide into the good tier here, and on the bottom side, they could be all the way down in the bad tier. It all depends on how they produce, more so than a lot of other teams. It's so tough to grade this out. I think they probably end up as one of the top teams, if not the top team in this subpar tier, just based on kind of like the median expectation, if you want to call it that. But I could certainly see them ending up here or even up here, depending on how, again, the likes of Slavkovsky, Caulfield, and Patrick Laine produce. So we'll see how it goes for Montreal. Another one that'll be really interesting to watch, but for now I'm going to throw them in the subpar tier. Excuse me, needed a quick water break there. The Nashville Predators made far and away the biggest splash this offseason. Steven Stamkos, Jonathan Marchessault, and Brady Shea, the three biggest additions. But of course, Stamkos and Marchessault, the two that impact the offense the most. I don't know whether I want to put this up into the great tier or keep it in the good. I think, Forsberg, O'Reilly, Nyquist, Stamkos, Novak, Marchessault, Jankowski, Sissons, Evangelista, Smith, McCarron, and Parsonen. I think it goes in good. I think upside, this actually could be an elite group, looking at growth of guys like Novak, Evangelista, Mike McCarron. If Stamkos produces at 5-on-5, if Marchessault also produces at 5-on-5, and we don't see regressions from Forsberg or O'Reilly, this potentially could be one of the top, again, 5 to 8 offenses in the league, I think. They're definitely going to do their fair share of scoring. They have two very, very good lines that can compete with most other top 6 lines in the league. But I think for now I just need to see kind of like how the chemistry works out. Does that top line of Forsberg, O'Reilly, and Nyquist have the ability to keep up the momentum they had last season? And, of course, can Stamkos, Marchessault, and Novak pair well together and, again, produce a 5-on-5? Stamkos' numbers at even strength last year were not that great. He was about as close to a power play merchant as you can get. So we'll see how he looks at even strength, and especially for Tommy Novak, how he's able to distribute to those two guys that are both 40-plus goal scorers pretty consistently if they move the puck well. So we'll see how it goes for Nashville. I could definitely see them being above that good tier, though, very early on. The New Jersey Devils. I think the offense here is actually bit, like, don't hate me for saying this, I feel like it's a touch overrated. Like, down the middle, they're pretty solid. Heischer, Hughes, Holla. And then Palat, Bratt, Meyer, Mercer, Tatar, and Nason on the wings. They add Paul Cotter as a depth piece, same with Steph Nason. I don't even know that I can put this in the great tier. Like, I'm looking at that compared to Nashville. And again, a lot of it depends on the production of some of these guys that were either hurt or just didn't produce all that well last season. Like Timo Meyer, Jack Hughes obviously had a great year when he was healthy, Nico Hischier, and Dawson Mercer, who really, really struggled, especially at the beginning of last year. This is a tough one. I think if I'm putting Nashville in good, I have to keep New Jersey in good too. I think these teams are pretty similar. Obviously, New Jersey is going to have the chemistry a little bit more, down. A lot of the top names on this forward group have been here for a couple of years. It's not the same as a guy like Stamkos and Marchessault coming in to a brand new team. But I just think they need to prove it a little bit once again. 2 years ago, same deal as Buffalo, kind of hopped out of nowhere, did really, really good last year. Again, more so injuries to blame than anything else, but they did struggle a bit more, and their power play wasn't the greatest. I think with the names they have on this roster, the expectations for their power play should be pretty high, and they weren't as good as I would have liked to see last season. So for now, we'll keep them in good, and again, as we finish out these last couple teams, I could shift this, but I think that's probably fair for now. The New York Islanders, I frankly really don't like this offense group at all. I mean, they have a well-rounded top nine, but like your biggest scoring threat being Bo Horvat is not great. He had a really, really good year 2 years ago. They bring in Anthony Duclair. That's the only change they really make offensively. Maxim Slipakov is listed as their second line left winger right now. This would be his rookie season. I just don't know that this group has enough firepower to keep up with the other top teams in the East. I'm frankly leaning more towards putting them in subpar. I think this team's structure and their goaltending carries them a lot. I don't think their offense is that great. Matt Barzal, while he's a great skater and puck mover, is like allergic to putting the puck in the net at times, it seems like. And they just really don't have any other top names that strike you as really, really strong goal scorers. I mean, a guy like Oliver Wahlstrom was expected to be that for them and just hasn't really panned out the way they expected him to. So unless it's a really big year for Anthony Duclair, or we have a bounce back goal scoring wise from a guy like Barzal, or even a guy like J.G. Pageau, I know that's not really fair to expect a ton from him at this point in his career, but two names like that I would like to see score a bit more. If that's the case, maybe this group bumps up one tier, but just all in all, they're built more for balance than they are for like crazy goal scoring, in my opinion. So I think keeping them in subpar is fair, at least for what I'm expecting. The New York Rangers, their top six is solid. It's a lot of this is going to depend on like the productivity of their younger guys. Like, can Alexis Lafreniere continue to build off of the year he had last year? What is Philip Heedle's health situation? What will Capo Caco look like? And then do we see regression from any of the likes of Zibanejad, Kreider, or Panarin, who had a career year last year? And then, of course, Riley Smith, the biggest addition for them in the offseason. He'll probably slot in with Kreider and Zibanejad. How will that line do? I think, frankly, he's probably in for a better year than he had in Pittsburgh last year. It's not hard to do that, I think. But I think this group will be a pretty interesting one to watch. Again, mostly for those three younger guys to see how they produce. I'm building up a big list here in the good tier, but I think the Rangers are probably in the good tier as well. Their biggest name by far is Artemi Panarin, and then from there they have a good bit of depth. I think, again, a really healthy top nine and a good mix of guys that play their roles pretty well, but also guys that can fill the net when needed. So not really expecting anything drastically different from the Rangers, just, again, looking at what happens with those three younger guys, Heedle, Caco, and Lafreniere. The Ottawa Senators, and this is a group that kind of the reverse of the Minnesota Wild and the Montreal Canadiens. The more I look at this group, the less I like it. Their top six has the potential to be very, very good. Brady Tkachuk, Tim Stützle, Claude Giroux, David Perron, Josh Norris, and Drake Batherson. And then it kind of falls off from there with Greg Pinto, Amadio, Gregor, Ostapchuk, and McEwen. If Norris and Batherson can stay healthy, that should be a top, 12 maybe, top 6 pair or group in the league. I think if Tkachuk has another year like last year, if Stützle bounces back a bit from what's a down year from his standards, this group could be very, very good. Again, that just talking about that top 6, but the bottom 6 just does not have the gas, in my opinion, to keep up with most other teams. And as much as I would love to grade these guys higher, I think they actually only go in the fine tier for now. I think the failure of the Alex DeBrincat project really hurt the momentum of this team offensively. And David Perron's a perfectly capable second-line left winger, but the step down from him to Alex DeBrincat's a pretty steep one, I think. And again, you're relying on guys like Norris and Batherson to stay healthy. And again, a bounce back from Tim Stützle and Giroux to continue kind of being an ageless wonder at this point. So not in love with the Ottawa Senators by any means. I would like to see them add some depth specifically on the wing, but we'll see what happens for them. The Philadelphia Flyers, biggest move for them offensively this offseason was, of course, Matvei Michkov. And below that, it's really not all that exciting. I mean, they have some decent young-ish pieces, but it's not enough that you can look at that core and confidently say, like, these guys are going to be good in a couple years. Those guys, namely Ty Forrester, Owen Tippett, Morgan Frost still there, Farabee and Bobby Brink still there. But none of those names really strike you as guys that have the potential to take over games in the next year or two. I mean, Owen Tippett last year was the biggest force for them of any of those guys, right? So we'll see if Michkov can step in and be one of those guys. I think they probably slot into this fine tier too. I think they have much more upside potential than some of the other teams down here, aside from maybe Montreal, again, talking about that potential peak of Montreal being pretty high. But I think they have a bit more depth than a team like the Ottawa Senators, but I think their upside up front in their top 6 is a bit lower than a team like the Ottawa Senators. So I think it's okay to keep them above the subpar tier. I don't think they're quite good enough to be in that good tier yet, so for now we'll keep them there. The Pittsburgh Penguins, this is a really hard group to grade. Down the middle, very, very solid. Crosby, Malkin, Hayes, and Lars Eller. That's a really, really deep center group. The wings, it gets a little bit skinny. Raquel, Bunting, O'Connor, and Lizotte on the left, and Rust. McGroarty listed on the second line, and then Cody Glass and Nola Chari. I hate to pad the good group, but I think this probably belongs in the good group. If they had some more support on the wing, this could very easily be up in this tier, but I just don't quite think they're there. Yeah, I mean, you have to expect to begin to see more regression from Crosby and Malkin. I think, I mean, they're both guys on the wrong side of 35 now. And their best winger is probably going to be Michael Bunting. So it's not horrible. And again, they have good center depth, which will be important for supporting guys like McGroarty and Cody Glass. But I just don't think they have enough upside without some help on the wing, like a guy like Jake Gensel, to propel them up to these top 2 tiers. So for now, we're going to keep Pittsburgh in the good tier. The San Jose Sharks, they got better offensively, but this is another one of these bad teams. I do think they will be worse offensively than the Chicago Blackhawks. I think you're relying a lot on names that just have not done it for that long. Celebrini and Smith, of course, the 2 biggest ones, and then a guy like William Eklund being your top left wing, Fabian Zetterlund being a second-line right winger. It's a much better group than it was last year. I just don't think it's improved quite enough to get them out of this bottom tier. The Seattle Kraken, they had Chandler Stevenson, and everyone else is a returning player from last year. McCann, Beniers, Eberle, Schwartz, Stevenson, Berkey, Tolvanen, Gord, Bjorkstrand, Cartier, Wright, who was, I guess, not a returning full player, and Brandon Tanev. And this is a really intriguing team for me. They look to be very deep on paper, right? Like, their biggest goal scorer should be Jared McCann this season, most likely. But there's no, like, dramatic fall-off like there is for a team like Ottawa, for example, right? They don't have as much superstar talent. They need a big bounce back from Beniers, a big bounce back from McCann, and they need Stevenson to continue what he did in Vegas. But there's not like their second line to their third line. It's kind of like their second line's better, but it's not dramatically better. So from a depth perspective, I actually really, really like what Seattle has. Because they struggled so much to score last year, I am going to put them in the fine tier for now. But I think this team could very well get up to this good tier. And they, depending on the production of some of these guys that had real tough years last year, they could jump really, really quickly, I think. I think one of the more well-rounded forward groups, it reminds me of kind of a dumbed-down version of Dallas, right? There's no Jason Robertson, there's no Rope Hintz on this team. And comparing the likes of, like, Logan Stankoven and Maverick Bork to, like, Ty Cartier and Shane Wright right now is probably not the most equivalent comparison, but I do think this team has a lot of potential to be good if they can just find the way to put the puck in the back of the net. I think the depth is really solid here. So I actually like what Seattle's putting together offensively. I think they just need to prove it a little bit, and they'll climb this ranking. The St. Louis Blues, another really hard to grade team. Like, the top six is okay. Neighbors, Thomas, Kyrou, Saad, Buchnevich, and Saad, and then it kind of falls off in the bottom six. It's going to be another team that goes in the fine tier. I mean, Thomas and Kyrou are still the two biggest names there. Throw Buchnevich in as well if you want. It's not enough to put them up in the top half, I don't think. It's not nearly as bad as some of these other teams. You could compare it maybe to the likes of a New York Islanders, but I think Thomas, Kyrou, and Buchnevich is a all-around better group than, like, Horvat, Barzal, and I guess you throw Nelson in there. It's relatively comparable, right? Probably more of a playmaking focused group in Long Island, and then a little bit more of a goal scoring focused group here in St. Louis for those main core of guys. Obviously, these St. Louis guys are a good bit younger than Barzal, Horvat, and Nelson. So all in all, I think it's okay. I don't think it's going to blow anyone's socks off by any means, and I think they're probably one injury away from being in the subpar tier. The Tampa Bay Lightning, the top line's disgusting. Gensel, Point, and Kucherov's the top three line in the league, I think. And then it kind of falls off from there, like, bad. Like, Hagel, Cirelli, Atkinson as the second line is okay. Sheary, Paul, and Asimon as the third line is all right. And then Gergensen, Glendening, and Mitchell Chaffee as the fourth line. I want to put this team in great so bad just because of that top line, but I don't even know if they're going to be able to carry them enough to do that. I think they probably end up here. I think that top line is going to score, like, they might as a group score 250 points. Like, I feel like that's probably pretty safe. They might push 300. And then from there, man, I mean, it's just going to be, they're going to be relying a lot on Brandon Hagel and Anthony Cirelli to, like, just pull stuff out of nowhere to make offense happen. And I think when they have nights that this line isn't clicking, or if one of these guys is hurt, it's going to be pretty tough. So I hope I'm wrong. I would like to see Tampa be competitive for 1 or 2 more years of Vasilevsky's, prime, if you want to call it that at this point. But I think this team's going to start to fall off relatively quickly. The Toronto Maple Leafs, we have a pretty thin top 2 tiers for now, but the Leafs are going to make it in here. I don't quite think they're in the elite tier yet. I think they stay in good. I just don't think they have the depth to be up here with Edmonton and with Dallas. I think, obviously, their core 4 of Matthews, Marner, Tavares, and Nylander are still in place, and that group takes up so much money that the depth is just not there, which has been a problem for the Leafs forever now. But you're expecting a bit of growth from Matthew Nyes and Bobby McMahon. There's a good possibility that Max Pacioretty comes into this team, whether he has a significant role or not to be determined, and can he stay healthy, also to be determined. And then Nick Robertson, whether he gets traded or makes this lineup, changes things a bit. He's a guy that has 20-goal potential, which this team could use, but I think that core 4 alone of Matthews, Marner, Tavares, and Nylander, especially in the regular season, has proven to be more than enough to power this team, and I don't anticipate that being any different this year. So they're going to stay in the great tier just because they have 4, players in that S tier, or at least close to it, I guess, if you want to exclude Tavares there. But this forward group is still very, very good just because of those 4 guys. The Utah Hockey Club, I have such a hard time with this group. Keller, Hayden, Schmaltz, Krause, Cooley, Gunther, Machelli, Bukestad, Doan, Stenlin, McBain, and Kerfoot. I actually think this one goes in the bad one still. I think relatively similar to Montreal, like their upsides could be high. But I think you're asking for pretty big steps from Cooley, from Gunther, from Doan. You need Clayton Keller to have another year like last year. I just don't think it's quite there for them yet. I think their strengths are actually now more focused on the back end and in net if Connor Ingram has another good year to keep this team competitive. I don't think the offense is all that great. I think it'll be a growth year. I think maybe a year or two down the road we'll look at this offense as being a little bit more put together, but for now I'm just not quite there with them. The Vancouver Canucks, this is one that I don't like. People, again, I've mentioned this in comments and whatnot, but I feel like Vancouver rides the swing of last year's momentum more than any team in the league. 2 years ago, they missed the playoffs. They had a good end to that season, but the start was brutal. And people going into last season were like, this is not a playoff team, yada, 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 whatever. They make the playoffs. They finish they finish first in their division. And now suddenly they're like this lock to make the playoffs, despite their additions in the offseason being DeBrusk, Sprong, Heinen, Sherwood, Derek Forbort, and Vinny Desharnais. Like, none of the biggest name obviously there is Jake DeBrusk, helpful winger for Elise Pettersson, but like their top six is Hoglander, Miller, Besser, DeBrusk, Pettersson, and Sprong. That's I don't know that that's even a top 10, top two lines in the league. I think it's good. Like, the upside of that's very good if DeBrusk and Sprong click with Pettersson, and Hoglander and Besser have similar years to last year. That'll be a good group, but Besser I would expect to regress from last year, and he's apparently having some blood clotting issues, so we'll see what his availability looks like. Pettersson needs to take a step up. We have to make sure Miller doesn't take a step back as far as his production goes. And then your bottom six is solid. Like, that's one of the better bottom six groups in the league, I think. But as far as scoring value goes, there's not a ton of it. There's a lot of role guys there aside from Sherwood and Garland. But I don't know. I just don't have a ton of confidence in that group. I think it goes in good. I think the depth is there. I just don't I feel like it's missing just one more piece. Like, one more really good right winger would make this group much, much more complete than what it is right now. And I know that's weird because of how good they were last year, but I just don't know that I have as much confidence as a lot of other people looking at this team might. But yeah, so we'll see what happens. I hope I'm wrong. I hope they're in the great tier, but I just can't quite get myself to put them there for now. The Vegas Golden Knights, this is a really hard one to grade, man. They have probably the best center depth in the league as far as 1 to 4 goes, and I know Oilers fans and Penguins fans and whatever, throw Dallas in there too, are going to argue that they have better center depth, but I don't know that genuinely any other team can throw out a top 3 centers that can compete with Eichel, Hurdle, and Carlson. I know the wingers here are not great. Like, there is a big fall off with the loss of Marchessault, and of course Riley Smith from 2 years ago. That is going to be a bit of an issue here, but I still think this team ends up in the great tier. I just think that rolling out those 3 centers, not that it's not going to matter who's on the wing, but I think you're going to see some improvement from a guy like Alex Holtz, who wasn't really given a good opportunity in New Jersey. Same can be said for Victor Olofsson, who's a guy who's done it in the past. He's been a pretty prolific goal scorer for Buffalo, but has just kind of been pushed out of those roles. And then a younger guy like Brendan Brisson, again, not dissimilar from Alex Holtz, but I think 2 guys that have not been given an opportunity yet that I think will get a pretty good one here and have a good opportunity to make themselves, more household name than they already are. So, I have high expectations for Vegas's offense. I wouldn't be shocked if I'm proven wrong here, but I do think that this group has potential to be pretty good, despite the fact that none of their names on the wing, sparing Mark Stone, if he can stay healthy, are all that exciting. The Washington Capitals, they did make some changes up front, namely Pierre-Luc Dubois, Andrew Mangiapane will probably be line mates actually this season. Daily Faceoff has it listed as Ovi, Strome, Wilson, McMichael, Dubois, and Mangiapane. I would love to see Dubois with Ovi and Wilson. I think that would be a pretty forceful forward group. I think they are, if we can get Dubois playing the way that he could potentially be, that would be a very, very physical forward group that would not be that fun to play against, and then it would leave McMichael, Strome, and Mangiapane, which is a kind of smaller line. But all in all, Ovechkin is not what he used to be. Tom Wilson even is getting to the point where he's not what he used to be. We don't know what Pierre-Luc Dubois or Andrew Mangiapane really are going to be. Dylan Strome is probably still the best forward on this team. And that being said, this group, I genuinely think, could fall to the bad tier this season. As much as I love my Capitals, I really don't love the offense. I think the defense is much improved. I think the goaltending is much improved with the addition of Logan Thompson. But I think, to be fair, I'm probably going to put them in subpar for now. I need to see what Ovi looks like at the beginning of the year, what Dubois looks like, what Mangiapane looks like, and how these other pieces kind of connect together. And again, another team that could go up in the good tier, like if Ovi's playing well and PLD is putting in a good effort and looking like he could put up 70-ish points or whatever. But for now, just given the history, specifically with the two bigger new faces in Dubois and Mangiapane, I think they have to stay in the subpar tier until they prove me otherwise. So yeah. And then the final team, the Winnipeg Jets. Talk about a team that just needs a number 2 center so badly. Kyle Connor, Mark Scheifele, Gabe Vilardi, very solid top line. Ehlers, Nemestikov, and Cole Perfetti. Like, put a name. I'm trying to think of a name that could potentially, like, put Nazem Kadri here instead of Vlad Nemestikov. This is a dramatically improved team. And then, like, because I don't love Nemestikov here. Third line of Niederreiter, Lowry, and Appleton. That's a very good third line. And then Morgan Barron, David Gustafsson, and Alex Iafallo on your fourth line. Like, that 2C hole is such a huge hole for Winnipeg that if they can fill, this team will be much improved. I think this offense borders on great if they can get a second line center that just fits. But without that, I mean, they go from here to here for me. Kyle Connor's fantastic. Mark Scheifele's still good despite his age. And guys like Ehlers, Niederreiter, Lowry, Appleton, and Perfetti, and Alex Iafallo, all provide really good value. But I think a lot of that is just going to get disconnected if they don't have a guy playing as a second-line center that is a real NHL second-line center. And with all due respect to both Vlad Nemestikov and Adam Lowry, I don't think either of them should be playing that role. The wing strength here is actually pretty good. They just need another center, and they're going to be one of the better teams in this tier, bordering on this tier. But I think just lacking that center depth is such a huge missing piece for this team that if they can resolve it, they will be much improved. So that's it for this tier list. Let me just go back through and make sure I don't want to change anything. I think I'm going to throw Jersey and... yeah, I think I'm okay with that. I think the Preds could very well prove to be long up here. I think if Hughes and Heischer stay healthy, this offense is very productive. And obviously, if none of the guys have major drop-offs in New York, this offense is still really productive as well. Yeah, I think I'm happier with that. This good tier was just way too much. Yeah, I think all these teams still belong in the good tier. So yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments section down below. Where am I right? Where am I wrong? Are there any other teams that belong in the elite tier? There's only 2 teams up there right now. They're both in the West. Let me know who else should be up there, if anybody. Thanks as always for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed it. This is the last big tier list, I think. There will be other ones, I'm sure, but of the 3 main positions, this is obviously section 3 of 3. So that's going to be it. Leave a like if you enjoyed it. Subscribe as well. It is free, and we will catch you guys in the next one.